Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, President, Dale Carnegie Tokyo Training. My special guest today is an old friend of mine, Gordon Hatton, who is the Vice President of Development and Delivery for Colt here in Japan. Gordon, welcome.
Thank you.
Now, you've actually had a number of roles here. You've been here a long time, Gordon. How many years altogether now?
I have. I think I'm up to 34.
34, my
Right.
goodness gracious. So let's rewind the clock a little bit. How is it that you got to Japan? What have you been doing all over these different years?
Good. Okay. So I grew up in Western Canada, and I studied architecture. Spent 6 years in the city of Winnipeg studying architecture.
Is that a tremendously cold place in the winter? Winnipeg?
is.
I got this
It
image
is.
of it's like very cold location.
Very.
So for you, this Japanese winter is like nothing for you,
Nothing
although
at
today's
all.
extremely warm, 20 degrees today,
That's right.
which is a bit crazy, but anyway. So
Absolutely.
Winnipeg must have been freezing.
It was. Good place to study.
Good
You
place to
stay
stay
indoors.
Yes, very
Right.
good.
Yeah. So anyway, I did that. I got my degree in architecture, and then I moved to Toronto, and I worked in architectural practice for 5 or 6 years, I guess it was, on a number of different building types in the 1980s. After that, I got a chance to come to Japan, and I came.
And how was that? How did that come about?
I came to work for 1 year with Shimizu Corporation,
Oh,
one of the top
okay.
5 construction
Yeah,
companies here.
major company. Yeah.
Right, and that was perfectly timed at the very peak of the bubble economy, late 1980s.
It's going crazy, wasn't it?
It was,
Yeah.
and it was a wonderful time to be a young architect in Japan because you could almost propose anything you wanted, and it had a good chance of getting built.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I spent a year working on a number of interesting projects with Shimizu at that time. Also enjoying the vibe of Japan during that period where there was nothing but optimism,
Yep.
and learning about the country and such, and finding a wife.
Ah, very good. Very good.
Yes.
That's a good achievement.
Yes.
Yep. And then, so what happens after that?
So after that, we returned to Canada briefly, and my wife also being an architect,
Both architects.
we came to the conclusion after a little while that the Japanese economy still had an awful lot to offer, and decided that we would come back. So we came back again, and I returned and joined another one of the big 5 contractors in their design department here, and ended up spending, I think, a total of 8 years with Takenaka.
Ah, Takenaka, Komuten. Yeah, right. Yeah, a very famous company. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And then always in the design area. And then what happens from there?
So I was in design most of the time I was there. I spent probably a year and a half to 2 years in the development department, but most of my time was in design. I worked on several different projects there. I think initially I was supposed to be a person who would come up with innovative concepts and whatnot, and then step back, and let the local team do the execution. But fortunately, I got the opportunity to stay engaged throughout from beginning to end. And it really gave me the chance to learn the entire construction process in Japan, including being assigned to the construction site for a year or so.
At the Gemba, right?
To work
on the construction
in the
site
site
there.
office,
Yeah.
coordinating details and all that sort of thing.
Inhaling lots of concrete dust and
No, I didn't do any of that.
avoiding dangerous activities on site.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Right. And so what happens after that?
Well, after that, I was actually given an opportunity to work for a foreign company in Tokyo then. Having spent 10 years and been very well educated in the Japanese industry by Takenaka, it positioned me in a good spot to take on a slightly different role. As we all know, in the 1990s, Japan changed quite a bit. It's sometimes referred to as the lost decade, but there was actually an awful lot going on. The first part of the decade, there was completing a lot of major projects, so there was still a lot of work in construction happening. But towards the back of the decade, opportunities started to open up for foreign investors coming into Japan. And they had really kind of different needs. The Japanese building industry here is very domestic, was then, it still is now actually, and it was largely dominated by the bigger players and didn't really have that much of a consulting culture in place. And particularly foreign investors needed advice on how to enter the market here, how to deal with building things or acquiring properties, There was some distressed debt being acquired and various other things going on.
And not dealing with the Yakuza is one of those things, I imagine.
I don't think that's so much part of it, actually.
Okay, good.
J-REITs were coming in and such. And so there were new opportunities to provide more transparency in cost, more control on the process, not necessarily following the Japanese process verbatim, but actually applying some global best practices. So I joined a company which had been established here as an American construction company in the bubble, and then was acquired by a British company, and then was acquired by an Australian company named Lease.
Lease, very famous company, yeah.
Yes. And we effectively established the process of project management in Japan in the construction industry, which had not really taken root up until that point.
And were you running Lease at that time?
I was running the project management
part of it. Because Lease sort of morphed into a type of recruiting company at one stage, didn't they? Where they were very much involved in placing people in the industry as opposed to actually building anything.
No. Lease had, in the early 2000s, we took on a very large job to start to build the transmission network for SoftBank, which at the time was called J-Phone, which had been Vodafone before that, I think, or vice versa, I can't remember. And that required ramping up the team and then scaling it back and ramping it up every time something came in. I think we started with 2G and then we did 3G and then it goes on, right? So you may have that impression from the fact that there were people coming and going in the company, but it was more that really
the Aussie guy who was running it, I remember him telling me, this may have been after that period, that they found there was a niche for themselves in that area, and they really found it was very lucrative, so they went hard. That's maybe coming after you were there, so I may be mixing up the timing. But anyway, please keep going.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. So at any rate, during that period, we were involved in a lot of projects that had some sort of international component to them, whether it was headquarter offices for multinational companies or a lot of the luxury retail brand flagship stores in Ginza and Omotesando, some different industrial plants for different entities coming into this market, some hotel work, and then a really interesting one, a university in Okinawa, and just a whole variety of things where we would represent the owners to some degree and help them to manage the construction process.
And really, if you think about it, the Japanese domestic construction industry has been pretty much the closed shop, and foreign companies have not really penetrated the market much. Even probably today, if you think about the scale of the market and the barriers, I guess, to entry must be fairly high. So companies that you've been dealing with actually were probably pioneering a lot of this stuff, I guess, in a way where it hadn't actually had a track record or a path before. And I guess if you've got foreign money coming in, they're a little bit more flexible. They're thinking about, okay, you've got a big track record overseas. We trust you. You know how to do things locally. That's good. Let's do it. But how about getting actual local business? That must have been a bit tougher, or maybe impossible. I don't know which is the word, tougher or impossible.
I mean, as you say, Japan is very domestic in construction. That's not unique to Japan.
No,
and in varying degrees that exists in probably every market, because it is a very physical task. You need local licenses to do certain things. You need available resources, a whole supply chain that is not just supplying you parts, but they're supplying you with people that come and build things day to day on site. And unlike, say, Singapore or something, we don't have a big resource of people nearby that can come in by truck every day and leave every day, that type of thing either. So Japan is quite closed in that respect. And also being very sophisticated in this industry, there was less opportunity to sort of burst into the market with your great global practices, right? So you have to really pick and choose where you come in. And I think that was where it was. It was probably more needing on the soft side than the hard side.
And I think also, I might have this wrong, but I think the Japanese pioneered the sort of office tower construction where they build a frame around it and they just basically, the floors go up a bit at a time. It's like this amazing methodology they've come up with, which I don't know that's popular or typical anywhere else, but they seem to me to have been very advanced in the style of high-rise construction, and also the demolition of which is, I don't even understand how on earth you demolish something that's 30, 40 levels high, but they've got this thing that sort of takes it down as well. It's like incredible. I'm presuming that's Japan has got a really a big advantage maybe globally and particularly domestically through their technology. Is that an incorrect assumption?
Right. Again, I mean, you'll see some of these techniques used in other global centers, of course. But Japan is particularly dense urban context for a lot of this. So the need is certainly there to contain sites safely. And, there's so many people coming by and such. So that's probably the impetus for developing some of this technology, I think. But yes, there are some pretty leading edge approaches being taken.
How long were you at Lend-Lease?
I was 10 years in Lend-Lease.
Okay, and then?
So during that period of time, I did a project for an American development firm named Pembroke. And so
I think that's when I met you. Maybe you just moved
possibly.
to Pembroke.
Well, no,
I think.
I think we met even before that.
Okay, I was trying to think. It was a long time ago.
Yeah. But I did a project for them first as a consultant, and then a few years later, Pembroke were about to embark on some larger work, and so invited me to come over and join. So I joined as head of development for Japan, and ended up building several projects here, and that was actually a really great experience because of the approach that we took. Pembroke is a long-term investor and was very interested in the quality of the product that we did, and that allowed me to sort of pull some of my architectural training back in. And we were very hands-on in all of the design and selection process, et cetera, et cetera. So I spent another 10 years building a mid-sized office building in Roppongi and some premium residential projects in this neighborhood as well during that time.
Because one of the things that used to distinguish Japan was the lack of infrastructure for modern business. Like today, the floors are full of cables,
Right.
And in the old days, it'd be a concrete floor.
Right.
And then you'd have to lay cables sort of somehow with a false floor. And it was still very much, we're still using faxes quite a bit, faxing information around. And that whole digital thing hadn't taken off at that time. Now, I'm sure that's changed today, and also the floor plans, the site, the size of the floors, etc. as well. I guess so. A lot of probably, foreign capital, which is sort of thinking more in those terms, were probably trend setting, I suppose, to some extent in what they were offering to tenants, which perhaps Japanese companies hadn't offered. Or have I got that wrong?
Yeah, I think to some degree you could give some credit to the foreign capital. The projects that you're thinking about are largely the very large scale ones, which are still developed by the major Japanese developers. But some of their lead tenants and most demanding tenants would be the multinationals. So in that respect, I suppose it was a response. It's probably also just a maturity of the Japanese industry where, as you say, in the pre-2000, a lot of office buildings didn't really satisfy the needs for the coming technology demands. They got up to speed pretty quickly during a decade or so. And now I think it's safe to say that Japanese office buildings are probably the gold standard in the world.
And the floor plates have gotten much bigger too, haven't they? If you think about foreign companies who've got hundreds of employees, they don't want them scattered across 5 floors. If they get them on 1 floor or 2 floors, they're much happier. And so if you think about traditional Japanese buildings, they weren't high-rise anyway. They were low, squat buildings, and they became high-rise, but quite narrow.
Right.
So the floor plates weren't very big, and that's changed. So now you've got these, Moribiru with their Roppongi Hills, and they're Taranamana Hills now, Azabudai Hills, and every other hill they've got. They're big floor plates, actually. It's quite a big change.
Yes, it is, I mean, you can argue that the work style is changing. It's evolving again. And, there's some places where having a lot of perimeter windows or fresh air access and such is important, and those very large buildings don't necessarily provide that, but they do provide a lot of other benefits that people appreciate.
And so how long are you at Pembroke?
So I was in Pembroke for 12 years, I think it was.
Quite a long time,
Yes.
And then next stage was Colt?
That's right.
Right. And Colt, you've been in Colt how long now?
2 years.
2 years, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, Gordon, you've been here a long time. You've had many different manifestations in your work here. So thinking back to your early leadership phases in your career here, what were some things that when you initially started leading here, because being a player and being a leader are two different things, and you were sort of probably in the design team and then suddenly you're leading a design team. What were some things that sort of struck you as like, okay, that's a bit different, or I'll have to change what I'm doing here, or I'm doing this, but it's not working. I got to work out what's not going on here that as I want it. What were some things that sort of struck you as being a bit different about Japan in terms of leading a team?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, you have to really reflect on the influences you've had up until that point and the people you've worked with. And I can now look back at it and say, this characteristic that I have probably came from that person. At the time, I probably didn't realize it, but there's some things, and that includes people that I worked for in Canada initially and people that I worked for in Japan when I first came here. And therefore, in some respects, I have a few tendencies that my staff think are very Japanese.
Right.
So,
like what, for example?
And I think a clue from that though is that you need to have empathy for how things are working and how your team is going to work. And if you've sort of lived in their shoes, you're going to probably be much more successful. And this is not just Japan, obviously. This is a global
But what does
thing,
that mean?
right?
I mean, walk a mile in their moccasins, to coin that North American phrase. I don't know if you have that in Canada. But anyway, what does it actually mean as a leader?
Well, as an anecdote, there was one time I was working on a project and one of our external design team members came to me and he said, do you remember how we have these internal reviews in the Japanese company? I said, yeah, I used to really enjoy those. Well, we had one yesterday. Oh, okay. My boss had a bunch of suggestions for changes to your project. Okay. You're not going to like them. But I'm obliged to tell you because my boss told me to tell you. Okay, good. Tell me. Well, he suggested this, this, and this, and this. You're right. I don't like them. He said, good. I've filled my obligation. So just sort of playing along with him.
I don't like them
important.
Means
well,
your boss's suggestions, forget those. I'm not going to go with it. Or I don't like what we're doing. I'm going to change.
Yeah.
So you're rejecting his ideas.
Understanding where he was coming from.
Right.
Basically, he had things that had been presented. He knew they weren't really the direction we wanted to go with the project.
But he had to deliver the message.
But he was obliged to deliver the message, yeah.
So you didn't shoot the messenger, Gordon, in other
exactly,
words, right?
Yeah. And being able to understand the pressure that he would be under and how he'd have to go back. Then, after that sort of fun conversation, we said, okay, how are we going to frame this
how are we
to go
going to go
back
and explain this? We're not going to do it.
Yeah. So, working with him in that respect. I think
it's interesting they didn't include you in the review session.
No, that's an internal review for them. You don't bring your client into that.
Oh, okay, you were the client.
I'm the
Sorry,
client.
I misunderstood.
Yeah,
Okay, you were the client.
It's much later in my career. So,
right. Gotcha. It's always better to be the client, I think, and say, no, we don't like that. We're going to go the way we decided. Thank you very much. We're paying. Do it this way. Yeah. Okay. And so, what were some other things that you noticed that you thought were, things you'd expected or not expected, or things that you came realization about how things are done here? And that's one of this empathetic, don't shoot the messenger, understand the hierarchy, positioning people, in their roles and appreciating what they've got to do.
Yeah. Again, I think you need to appreciate the value of teamwork and how people view teamwork here.
How do they view teamwork here?
Well, I think, starting right from the educational system, and of course there's stereotypes that we all kind of lean on here, but how they do things together in school collectively, and rather than assigning responsibilities to particular individuals for particular deliverables, it's kind of a collective approach. And you have to be able to appreciate that and encourage it and make sure that it works. But you also have to explain it to your overseas counterparts that maybe don't understand how this is working and why we should be patient with this process.
And I guess too, we're brought up in the West in a very individualistic approach to work and achievement and accountability, responsibility. And so, I think the Japanese approach of collective effort, collaboration, coordination, it's a great approach, and I think they do it very, very well. I think there's probably, at different times there's a place for both, isn't there? I always think that when there's an emergency, Japanese become paralyzed because they have trouble taking accountability and responsibility to direct things. But if it's steady as she goes, they're very, very good. So I often wonder about that. I always think that maybe Canadians are similar. If you ever have a disaster, I always want a bunch of Australians around me, because someone will seize the moment and start making decisions and get everyone organised and direct things, and it'll happen straight away. In Japan, I don't see that too often.
I don't know. We had an aircraft incident recently that panned out quite the opposite, didn't we?
In the sense of, at Haneda, right, with the thing. Well, again, that's, I don't know, what did they do? They got everyone out of the plane in super short, quick time, which is very impressive. They said it was faster than the drills that they practiced to actually get people out of planes, and the planes catching on fire at the front, and they're all coming out the side and the middle and the back. So that was impressive.
Yeah, it's a great example of training and composure and dedication of each individual who was involved in it, and also of the passengers.
Well, that's the other thing too. Yeah, that's passengers staying calm and taking direction and being told what to do. So that was good. Maybe the flip side of the Australian is hard to get people to do what you tell them to do. But what other things you'd notice about leading that was different for you, or exciting, or challenging, or rewarding, or comforting?
I think another lesson really is that there's different common senses in different cultures. And this is, again, something you're probably very familiar with, but I've been in a couple of situations where counterparts had no idea why the other party was thinking the way they were. It wasn't logical to them.
Now, these are two Japanese counterparts, or a Japanese and a foreign counterpart?
Japanese and foreign.
Japanese and foreign, okay, right.
Yeah. So, again, if you can appreciate both sides of it, then you're going to get somewhere. But if you have a single view to things, it's difficult, and you need to understand the people that you're working with, that each day they bring a skill set, they bring a passion for what they want to do. And your job as a leader is to facilitate that, not to try and regulate them to do it your way.
Just on that, I often think that, when in Rome, do as the Romans do is a very typical Western expression. But I think that the Japanese version of that is, when in Japan, do it the Japanese way. When in Rome, do it the Japanese way. And I often wonder about that flexibility. So are the foreign corporates flexing to match the Japanese requirement? How often do the Japanese flex to meet the foreign requirement?
I think that on an individual basis, you may find that there are some people who feel tremendous sense of freedom of being able to do it in a different way. And they're actually very cooperative and quite eager to try and do things differently if they truly understand and buy into why your particular entity, your investor, whoever, wanted that specific way. I don't know, maybe some of the impression of when in Rome, do it the Japanese way is from hearing about circumstances when Japanese companies are working overseas, perhaps.
What's been my experience when I was working in Australia, dealing with Japanese companies over there, that I didn't see too much when in Australia, do it the Australian way. It was like, no, we have to do it this way. So I always wondered about that. I thought, well, okay, how does that work? I know in Japan they're going to be very keen to do it their own way, but they didn't. Well, that time, this was many years ago now. Maybe things have improved since those days, but I always felt there was that inflexibility. But anyway, I'm interested to hear your experience.
Well, I think there's maybe two things at play here. One is that in many cases, not necessarily Australia, but some of the other countries that they work in, they may actually be working for a Japanese customer as well.
I see.
So that's the expectation of their customer. So of course, that's why they're doing it that way. The other piece could be that, and it's similar for someone who's foreign coming here, is you've been brought here for a reason. What difference are you bringing? You're not here to just be the same as everyone that's already here. You're bringing something different. So to a certain degree, you need to do it your way, or you will lose the essence of why they wanted you in the first place.
Differentiation's gone.
The trick is how to make it mesh with what does work well.
So thinking about the teams that you've been leading over this period of time, these 34 odd years, what things did you find worked well to get the team members engaged in their work?
Yeah. I think recognizing the contributions that people are making to the effort. I remember when I was young, you mentioned earlier about construction sites. When I was on site, oftentimes I would grab a helmet and walk through the site at my lunchtime. And some of the workers got to know me after a while. And so I had a good relationship with carpenters and those types of things. And I found that they would make a point of coming and asking me how to do something, to give a little bit of direction on something, rather than just saying, we're going to get this over with as fast as we can. We're just going to do it. They would come and consult because they wanted it to be not just good, they wanted it to be perfect. They had a real pride in what they were building. And to be honest, that's the thing I enjoy most about working in Japan, is this consistent pride that every player on the team has to doing the very best job they can. And we see that in the quality of buildings here.
I think that's also a reflection too of the time, because often in the West, the subcontractors are on a schedule, it's all calculated down to the money. They're trying to shave time, cut corners, cut costs. And that artisan, perfectionism thing sort of disappears, and it becomes, time, money equation. Okay, we do this faster. It doesn't matter how well we do it faster. We make more money, do it faster. And so that nexus, I think, is a bit different here, where the more of an artisan culture, probably more European culture, is we're going to do it properly. We're going to do it, take the time and get it right. Measure twice, cut once type of mentality.
I mean, there are certain markets too where you'll see that overseas, of course. So you can't generalize it that way. But yes, the measure twice, cut once does sometimes make it feel like things are happening slower here. Could be true, but there's a reason behind it. And I think, on the engagement, first of all, letting people understand that they're part of this. And a few times on jobs I've been involved in, we've encouraged them at some point, whether it's completion or a particular event during the partway through, to actually bring their family and show them.
That's nice.
Here's what I contributed.
Here's
to
what
building.
I did. So would Japanese companies do that? I've never thought of Japanese companies doing that. They do that too?
Yeah. I mean, we did it in partnership with Japanese companies.
Good. That's nice.
So, that's a way to encourage people and make them really feel, an ownership for what they're creating. But I think also on the engagement thing, companies always do engagement surveys, and it feels like Japanese pick somewhere between 4 and 6, no matter how they feel about something, right?
Out of a scale of 10, right?
Yeah. So what I've actually done recently is actually pulled my team aside ahead of the survey and said, okay, here's what we're doing. If you're really upset about something, don't just give it a 4, because that won't get any attention. It won't get fixed. If you think something needs fixing, you got to vote accordingly. So that globally they will understand, because in other countries, that's what they're going to do. If there's something they really think needs attention, they're going to draw attention to it. Similarly, if it's something you think needs rewarding, don't just give it a 6. You got to make it stand out. And I think that sort of worked.
That's good, because you're right. Those surveys, my experience always, APAC globally is always the lowest in the global surveys, and right at the bottom of APAC sits Japan, and headquarters is giving you a hard time about, what are you doing in Japan? Look at these results. So no one's engaged over there. You're obviously a dill. What are you doing? And so trying to explain this Japanese calibration and this perfectionism that came before. I mean, their thinking is, well, an 8 or a 9 is like absolute perfection. I mean, gee, no one's perfect, so we'll give it a 6. It's a good score, better than 5, And so, 6 is a great score. Well, except it's not a great score, is it? Yeah. What other things you notice about the engagement side of things that worked? You talked about the praise, getting the families involved, getting the proper feedback to get the attention.
Yeah. You can go too far in the opposite extreme too, and sort of embarrass people by singling them out for something, right? So that's kind of a unique one here, I think. Most countries, you can't praise people enough, right? But here you do need to be kind of careful.
So what you're talking about there is you're cautious about giving praise because?
Just sort of putting people in front.
Yep.
Some people, that's great, but you sort of need to understand the person first and test out how they're going to react to being singled out as having done something wonderful.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. So they might enjoy to have a lunch with you one-on-one where you tell them what a great job they did, rather than being, come up to the front of the room, Tanaka-san, you did it. And Tanaka-san's thinking, uh-oh, now I'm going to be a target for everybody to whinge about me and bitching and backbiting about me being singled out. And what about them? And I don't need that degree of, tension in my life. So, Gordon, please leave me alone. Yeah. So there's always that backdrop, isn't there?
That's probably not just Japan. We just notice it because we happen to live here, but it's probably introvert, extrovert, and various other ways that you can look at people, right?
Yes. But I think it's an important point because we might assume that someone likes the limelight and think, oh, yeah, get the attention. Right. But actually, for them, it's a disaster and they don't enjoy it. They feel worse. So it's not having the desired effect, is it? In terms of, getting ideas, now you've had, an amazing career across countries, across, disciplines within the business. You come with a lot of experience, you come with a lot of insight, a lot of ideas to a job. And so there's always a danger when you're the leader that you're just bubbling with creativity and ideas, and also you're plugged into the bigger world, be it the foreign world plus the organization's headquarters, and you're getting the direct feed from the mothership. So a lot going on in here, and there's always a danger that as leaders we start to dominate the idea creation and making stuff happen. And I have to remind I'm talking about myself here too. I'm guilty of this too. I have to sort of stop myself and say, okay, cool it. Let's get some ideas from below and find out what they're thinking, not just what I'm thinking. So what have you found works well to get the ideas from the team?
Actually described me too. I think I'm pretty forceful sometimes on things. I think that, brainstorming, I love whiteboards. 20th century technology, but they work really well still. I think just pulling out ideas and getting people to just take a step back and park some of the reasons why this won't work. Just say, let's just not worry about that for a moment and just think this through. And sometimes people will speak up and be creative. I mean, I guess I probably tend to work more with people who are creative in the industry that I'm in. So maybe they're kind of self-selecting and I don't have the same problem that people in other industries perhaps have. But
you got the right idea though. I mean, I like the fact that you said that, we're going to separate the work here. Part A, let's get all the ideas out. Part B, let's make some priority decisions around which ones we'll go forward with. And a lot of companies' cases, they don't have that separation. So as the ideas come up, they're being judged. And you and I both know, if you tell somebody in Japan their idea's crap, well, they will never come up with another idea publicly again in their entire career. And a lot of them probably had that experience at some point, so they're hesitant. And I suppose if you're actually walking the talk and you're letting the ideas well up and you're not judging them and you're just getting them all up, and then you're having some collaborative, collective decision-making on, okay, which ones shall we go with here? People realise, oh, this is a psychologically safe environment where I can put my ideas up and they can be, added to the list of ideas we're going to go forward with, or maybe not this time. And I'm safe to do that, so I feel comfortable to do it, as opposed to I'm terrified that I'm going to get, criticised, or someone's going to rubbish my idea, and I'll lose face publicly. So I think the separation is good. That's a very good start. I think for a lot of companies, they don't even get to that point. Gordon. So you're way ahead of the game there compared to a lot of companies.
I think something that can often get lost too is that feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
Because you may come up with a bunch of ideas collectively, and then you bundle them up and you jump on the airplane or the Zoom call or whatever it is and present them and come back and say, this is the one that was chosen. You need to explain why.
Yeah.
People really want to know what were the decision process. Why was this scheme chosen and not this one? Because they contributed to creating those options. They want to know what the outcome was, what the analysis was.
At least you're getting some feedback there. One of my frustrations in my work career have been in organisations where they go through the process of doing the brainstorming, and you spend the time and you spend the brain power and the effort, and you get all the ideas out and on the sheets of paper and whatever. That's the end of it. Those ideas, where did they go? Did they ever get picked up? Did they ever get implemented? Did they ever get applied? And when you go through a few iterations of that, you become very cynical, about the whole process. And you think it was a waste of time, because I'm going to go through this effort here. We're going to generate a bunch of great ideas, and no one's going to do anything with them. And suddenly they get on bits of paper or post-it notes or big sheets of paper, or they take photographs of the whiteboard or something. Psst, that's it. Yeah. So I think, this point around, the feedback, or this is what happened, or, okay, the idea came up this direction, but then it was taken another direction. This is why, I would have loved to have gotten feedback, and I remember, I'm not going to name the company, but one company I worked for, the seniors in that company, the directors in that company, they got scared. They got scared because it was a very hierarchical company. And for the people at the bottom to start, revolutionising the ideas from their side was a bit like, oh, hang on a minute. We didn't think of that, so it can't be a good idea type of mentality. And on purpose, they crashed it. And I witnessed that, and I couldn't believe it, because, we spent, it was like 3 days. It was like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and literally the entire room we were operating in, every skerrick of space on those walls were covered in great ideas, and it was so energized, and we were all so hyped up, and then nothing. And I always thought about that. Wow, the hierarchy couldn't take it, and I thought, geez. Anyway, that's just that particular industry perhaps, but that's a real mistake, I think, in terms of not letting people get their ideas out and get them implemented, right?
I think that's a really important point. And I've a number of times experienced, say, walking a construction site with a very senior person who's come to visit and take them through. And the ones that are most successful are the ones that they make a point of showing respect and thanks to everybody they encounter on that site. Someone that's pushing a wheelbarrow or whatever, they greet them. That makes a huge difference for that individual, but for everybody else watching too. They're truly displaying the values of the company that they lead. And that's an important lesson for everyone, whether you're the very top person or somewhere else in the hierarchy.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, that's a culture, isn't it? It's a culture of respect. It's a culture of we're not hierarchical. Everyone has value, appreciation for the effort that you make. Everyone's got their different contribution, but we recognise everyone's contributing in different fields and different areas and different angles, but they're all contributing. And I think, again, I'm going to put my hand up here. I have to keep reminding myself to appreciate people more and thank people more, because you tend to be busy and you tend to be getting on with it, and you tend to be focused and, going for it, and crash through or crash, and you forget to do those little things. And I think as leaders, and I'm putting my hand up here as someone who could do a better job in that area, and I have to keep reminding myself to do that. So it's a good point. In terms of building trust, Japan, I think, is a high trust culture. Trust is important everywhere. I think that's just a given. But somehow for me, Japan's just got that little bit of extra oomph there on the trust department. And the thing that always amazes me is I thought, before I lived here, I thought the Japanese were very unemotional. I thought they were very, robotic and logical and technical and, samurai type of thing, And then when you live here, you start to realize how emotional they are. It's like, wow. And people make, when you're interviewing people for jobs, you're trying to get them to join your company, you go through the resume, they've made a change, and you ask them, well, why did you change from this company to this company? Oh, my senpai called me, my senior called me. That's not a logical decision. Like they completely switch companies because their senior called them and they have an obligation to their patron from before, and they make a illogical decision in a way, and then they go and join their senior, and then what would often happen is that corporate would be from a foreign country. They'd close the office in Japan, and they're back out on the street again a couple of years later, and the senior's on the street too. So it always struck me that, wow, okay, there's a lot more emotional stuff going on here than maybe we appreciate and initially. So now I'm sort of aware of that. So when I'm looking at these resumes, I ask these questions because people jumping around from a Japanese corporate point of view, they'd be out. Too many job changes. You're a job hopper, you're gone. But when you dig into why, the company closed, my senior called me, blah, 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 you can understand it. But they get punished in a Japanese system for doing that. But as foreigners, we don't care that much, right? Because we're a bit more flexible. But yeah, what things have you found work well in building trust?
Well, again, I think, my thought process while you were telling that story is that in at least my industry, a lot of things are project-based. So it's a little bit logical that you've completed something. This is an opportunity to move on. And particularly if you find you're kind of in a rut of doing the same thing over and over again, that you may want to, graduate to a different building type or something, a different role, that type of thing. So it doesn't necessarily shock me when people move periodically. But building trust, I think, we've talked quite a bit about respecting people's contributions and such, but also demonstrating your effort and your passion for what you're doing. And, sometimes you can be wrong, but if people really see that you have conviction in what you're doing and why you're trying to do it, they can evaluate you too and say, maybe you're wrong in this instance, but you're doing it for the right reasons.
Your heart's in the right place.
People. Yeah, that type of thing, I think. So, how you present yourself and, sometimes just really diving in and doing something because you think that's the right thing to do is inspiring to people, even if they think maybe he's on the wrong track. So I think that's important. And, having had experienced things and being willing to learn is really important.
What other aspects you think work well in building trust with the Japanese team?
Well, I think you have to participate in, you talked about the sort of social side of things. You need to be open to that and try to engage. If you're new to the country, it's not necessarily easy, but you still need to get in there and be part of the team, not be aloof. And similarly, I guess if you're young, you can kind of jump in and just explore things and try things out as well. But
is that changing? I mean, once upon a time when I got here in Japan in the 70s, I got here in 79. In those days, people were working 6 days a week. Saturday was a work day, it was a school day. Company employees of a certain level would be spending the Sunday, not with the family, but on the golf course with their clients. So it was like 7 days a week, really. And then you'd have the company trip. They'd go somewhere to the onsen. They'd go together, or maybe it's Hawaii or something. They'd go overseas and they'd travel together. And then you'd have the obligatory drinks after work, and all get smashed and tell the boss he's an idiot and get away with it because you can say I was drunk and all this sort of stuff, And a lot of that has pretty much disappeared in the sense of company trips. Young people forget that. I don't want to go. Going out after work together, no, I don't do that either. I want to go home, I want to go to the gym, I've got my hobbies to do, whatever I'm doing, blah, 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 forget that. So I'm just wondering whether, this generationally, we're seeing something maybe more akin to what we grew up with in the West, where we didn't do that when I was growing up in business at all. You had 5 o'clock or 5:30 or 6 o'clock. For me, I was going to the dojo. Finish work, go to the dojo. That's it. Don't hang around with the team. You might have a lunch occasion with your compadres, if you have some big celebration or something. But some people you have lunch with regularly. But what do you think? Are we seeing a generational shift here?
Yeah, I think you're quite right that, the way we practice business here now is completely different from 30 or 40 years ago. And some of the things that you mentioned are probably very nostalgic for you and I. But yeah, maybe they would make younger people a little bit nervous. But on the other hand, there's some things that are pros and cons, obviously. The sort of social support that companies gave their employees under life employment and whatnot there were benefits there too. It worked at that time. The world's a different place, and people need to adjust. And particularly for people like us, we can't be stuck in the way we used to do things, because that may not work anymore, right?
I remember I used to work for Shinsei Bank, and before that was a long-term credit bank. And so I discovered when I joined Shinsei that under the long-term credit bank HR direction, they had a unstated policy that they would choose good-looking Japanese women to work in the bank because they expected the guys to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they'd never have any chance of finding a wife. So they decided, okay, I know how to fix that. We'll just get a bunch of the better looking women in here, and they'll have women they can, meet and marry and, have families, and everything works, but we'll still be eating our 7 days a week out of them, type of thing. I thought, wow, that's an HR policy and a half. But I think, now we have more women in the workforce. I think Japan's got more women in the workforce than America. Different statistics you see at different times.
Right. And
that's a reflection of the demographic of, we're not getting enough people being born and not enough people in the workforce, and we need more women. And they're saying we need nearly 7 million foreigners here to hit Japan's growth rates by 2040 or something. I read that the other day. I don't know whether that's going to happen or not. But what do you think about the place of women in the workforce in terms of having careers, being taken seriously, being given opportunities to become leaders, that type of thing?
Yeah, as you say, it's changed a lot, but it's not anywhere near where it needs to be. And it's quite difficult for a number of reasons. The support needs to be there. The culture needs to follow through. But at the same time, it does take time to get people up to the positions where they need to be in. I think that there are, at the grassroots level, there is, and at the younger level, there's probably a recognition, and it doesn't sound the least bit unusual. It's almost, the way I'd put it, I guess, is people think it's natural. It doesn't need to be a forced initiative by the government or something, because that's not really working, I don't think. But there's still a lot of work to be done. And looking back, I suppose a few decades, multinational companies were the beneficiary of that process, where some extremely capable female employees were available to the multinationals because of that structure in the domestic market.
Also returnees too, young Japanese
too.
Because they'd come back from a stint overseas, or they'd be working or growing up even overseas and come to Japan, and the HR department could not work out, okay, how are we going to fit? They don't fit the culture because they didn't come here straight out of uni, and they're a bit of a burr under the saddle because they thought differently. They spoke up. They did stuff that's not really acceptable, so it crushed them and take all the benefit of their different aspects out, force them to be like everybody else, which defeats the purpose of the diversity, doesn't it? So I think Japan's better with that now. They're a bit more capable of accepting the differences.
I think one of the things we're struggling with in my industry, and this is completely a global phenomenon, it's not Japan at all, is that there's not enough women in the STEM industries, particularly engineering for building works, right? There's simply not enough going through, and they need to be encouraged and helped, because they certainly have the capabilities to do that, and there's plenty of roles that really need those people. I have noticed there are far more women working in construction, but some of them are in roles that might surprise you, but a number of them are in design related or administrative related. And I don't mean secretarial administrative. I mean, managing a site office or something like that. So I think there is a crop of younger talent that's coming up, and hopefully in another half a generation, they will be the leaders on a number of projects. But I think it's only started recently, and there still needs to be
some way to go.
Yeah, a lot more effort put into it.
Well, I mean, foreign companies, we had nice access to all these English-speaking, foreign-educated Japanese who couldn't fit into the Japanese system. But then the Japanese system said, "Oh, look at this. Population's going down. You know what? We need to get out of Japan because we stay here. Our market's going to shrink. Let's buy some stuff overseas. Yeah, now we need some people to staff these companies overseas. Who can we get? Oh, these English-speaking Japanese, perfectly. So suited. So, we are now competing with them, whereas before we were competing with each other for this pool. And I think, as you said before, too, women are very capable and an unutilized resource, an unappreciated resource, where I think people are starting to, pennies dropping, like, hang on a minute, well-educated, capable, confident, although having said that, though, a lot of people tell me that, I don't know if these numbers are perfectly exact or not, but some people say that if a man has, only 60% of the job spec for a job, they'll put their hand up to get the job, but a woman has to feel she has 90% to put her hand up to go for the job. And I actually had lunch with a Japanese founder of a company today, and he said that 75% of his team are women. He's in the accounting side of things. And he said, yes, the women are not putting their hand up for positions in leadership. It's an issue. So this is, I don't know, cultural, this is, workload, this is work-life balance. There's a whole bunch of things wrapped up in that equation. But somehow I think as a country, it's got to be worked out. And I think that foreign companies are probably leading the way there, of showing what can be done. In terms of building a culture, you have the company like Colt is an American company, right? It's got a foreign culture.
No, it's British.
Sorry? British. Sorry, my mistake. Sorry.
Parent company is American, though, so you're not too far off.
Okay, parent company is American. Okay, so British. So you've got that Goshke culture, and then it's in Japan, so you've got Japanese culture.
Right.
And then you've got, different foreigners inside the company, like you, running divisions and you're vice president, et cetera, with your own ideas on what sort of culture you want for the people in your team. What have you found works well in getting all those cultures to align, and what have you found works well to build a culture in Japan?
Yeah, I think you need to identify the common thread, which in our company is probably around the technology and the facilities that we're building and such, and the importance of building this infrastructural facilities that we are. In past examples, I think at least in one case, it's the dedication to excellence of the product, the craftsmanship, the artistic value of what we were doing really sort of aligned people. Another case, to be honest, I think everybody just became really good friends. We just liked working together. So there's probably a number of things that work for different companies, and you have to sort of identify what works. And in a larger company, you probably have all of those dynamics happening in different places, right?
Yeah, I've never studied architecture, but I've worked with architects, but it seems to me it's a very precise, highly accurate activity. It requires a certain type of mental framework. And so I'm guessing that when you're working with people who are also like that, you appreciate that aspect of things. And you said before about having the passion, but also having the expertise. And so if you're working with a group of people who are in a similar activity with a similar mindset, the alignment becomes much easier, doesn't it? You have shared values and you have shared aspirations and shared appreciation for the work that's being done. So if you had someone who is maybe not so specific or not so accurate, didn't value those things, a bit laissez-faire, a bit hit and miss, that would be a big issue because you're sort of outside the broad culture of the group. And that, you're not going to fit in, are you? That's like, well, hang on a minute, you've got to be more direct and specific than that. You're a bit too hit and miss there. That's not going to work for us. So is that a case of birds of a feather flock together, do you think, that they naturally align that way?
That may be true within certain subsets, but architecture is a team sport, And on a typical project, you will easily see hundreds, if not in some cases thousands of people making contributions. So you're never going to align everyone.
Right.
They're bringing different sets of skills together. But I think that you will find that a lot of people that are in the building industry are probably quite creative. They're curious. They like to make things. They understand sort of physical aspects of whatever they're working on. They're familiar with working as a group on things wherever they're from. Even the famous celebrity names actually work very collaboratively on everything.
There's 50 other people behind the scenes also on that, right?
And you're raised in an environment where you're always exploring options. You're trying to generate new ideas, variations, etc. So you're quite versed in that process. And also problem solving is a huge component of everyone's educational background. Typically, no matter what area you've come from, you've faced time and cost constraints on something, unless you happen to be the artist who's been given the great commission to do something for the lobby and given free rein. But even they have lots of constraints. So I think people understand the parameters that each other are working with.
In terms of, someone rang you up, Gordon, and said, hey, listen, Gordon, I've been given this big job in Japan. I've got to come over and run the organization, but don't know Japan, don't speak Japanese. Well, how can I be successful there? What advice would you give them?
Be yourself.
Be yourself, okay.
Yeah. Some of the most successful people here don't speak Japanese, and they don't let that get in their way. They just wear their heart on their sleeve. They show that they're a very warm and outgoing person, and people warm to them.
Well, what if you were being yourself? I often wonder about this because if you're, I'm making this up, but imagine you're a hard-charging exec from, let's pick America, where it's a, dog-eat-dog culture in your business, and, you crash or crash, and you get the results, and you get the promotions, and you get the big bonuses, and it's all about money, and it's all about you. And then you're sent to Japan, and you be you, which is all of those things here. So when you say be yourself, I wonder, that person to me is going to be a train wreck.
You're going to love this answer, but I think they need to hire a coach to keep them on track, right?
I know a good one. I know a really good one. But that's often the case, isn't it? And particularly too, if you've been charged up with a directive from your boss, like typically, you know this, that they have their business here. They hire a retired Japanese CEO to run it because he's Japanese, usually he. He runs it, doesn't go anywhere. 5 years go by. They don't know what the hell's going on in Japan because he runs it like a castle and doesn't tell them anything. And they think, oh my God, what's going on in Japan? We're not getting the results we expect to be having. Okay, well, we're going to get rid of him and we're going to send you out there to fix it. Now, your job, go there, fix that, get Japan happening. We want to see some results, want to see some numbers, get into it, or you're gone. That's the mandate, right? So you hit the ground running here, and yourself you're going to be is like, geez, I got to get the results. I got to get numbers. Things got to move. We change. I need, dynamics. Again, train wreck right there. So often people are not given the leeway, the time, or they don't know to negotiate the time. They don't know to go back and say, well, that's fine, but I need 9 months before you're going to see any changes in Japan, because that's how Japan is. And if you don't accept that, I'm not going. Send some other poor schmuck and let them have a train wreck on their own, so not me. So, I'm challenging that a little bit because I know I've met these hard-charging, hard-driving foreign execs, and either they get fired or they change. But they certainly cannot exist as they are here because the oxygen just gets sucked out of the environment for them. They can't breathe. So what do you think?
It's a tough role to be thrown into, I guess. I have probably met a few people that have been put in that position, but I haven't experienced myself, so I wouldn't really know what to say.
Well, I was just challenging, be yourself. I'd say maybe the point there is be someone who is adaptable and flexible to understand that you've got certain traits and attributes which are going to work in Japan. You've got some which won't work in Japan. Your job is to figure out which is which pretty quickly. and make the changes you need to fit in and be able to work within the system, I guess.
I guess there's there's a distinction to be made between be what got you here versus be authentic. And I think it's the latter that, everyone has weaknesses, and it doesn't necessarily hurt to let people know what your weaknesses are, because then they can help you overcome them. If you sort of try to be the tough guy, maybe it's going to lead you down the wrong path. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's I always feel that if you don't set things up in Japan properly and you're trying to drive things, it turns out just like pushing a piece of string. I don't know if that's a Canadian analogy or metaphor or American metaphor as well, but in Australia we talk about trying to push a piece of string. Extremely difficult. And if you don't set it up, you're trying to push, but nothing's happening. And so you think, oh yeah, I've got all that happening. I've told them what I want to happen, You go back and you check. Nothing's happening. Nothing has been done. And you go, wow, I told you guys what I wanted, what's going on. And then the penny starts to drop that, well, that ain't working. I got to rethink what I'm doing here, because obviously this procedure is not flying, and I got to change. So in terms of any other things, you mentioned that Japanese language wasn't necessarily a requirement, but is there anything else that you think is something they could do to be more successful? Anything they need to change, you think, apart from, you said be authentic. Some people don't speak any Japanese, are doing very well here. Anything else they can take on that would make them more successful?
Yeah, I think that, you need to be open about why you're here, what's expected of you, and that the people that will be working with you can help in that, and the benefits that they will see from that as well. And then realize that everybody's got a life to enjoy, and get out and enjoy your time here a little bit. Make the most of it. See what you can learn. What can you take back? What are you going to learn from this experience as well? And that's true too. I always think to myself, if you've been in Japan and you've experienced things here, you are going to be a much better operative in another country. If you're running your own thing, be it a shop or whatever you're going to do, your customer service, your client service, your mentality around that's going to be a lot better. Your manner is going to be a lot better. Your empathy is going to be a lot better. Your language is going to improve a lot. Your communication is going to improve a lot. I think, Japan is almost a fantastic finishing school for a lot of executives, I think, who can then be more broad-based and more effective in any environment. Because I always think to myself, man, if you can make it here, is it going to be harder anywhere else? I don't know. I don't think so. I think this is probably in many ways as harder as it's ever going to get to be effective. It's probably why a lot of expats get sent here for a while.
Yeah, you think so, to train them up. What about your definition of leadership? How would you define leadership, Gordon?
I think that, showing the passion for what you're doing and sharing that with others that will participate in the success.
That'll work. Well, great chatting.
Yeah.
Jordan.
Nice to speak
Thank you very much. So join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.